for joining. Tabisha, are we ready to go live at 9? Okay, perfect. I'm just going to give it a minute, get some more people to join, and then I think if we can go live at just like 1 minute after 9, I think that would be great. But I think we can just chat. I just want to give it a few more minutes. Tabisha, I think let's get started. We are recording and it is being live streamed as well, so people will be able to catch up if they need to. I'm accepting people. Please let me know when I can start. Thank you so much. Good morning. Can everyone see me?
Yes.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Lindy Meyer. I am acting CSIR Media Relations Manager. Thank you all for being here today as we convene for a virtual media briefing on combating the pervasive issue of fake news and misinformation, particularly in the context of elections. Today's media briefing is dedicated to shedding light on the collaborative research projects undertaken by the CSIR and the University of Pretoria. Sorry, I'm losing my voice. Together, we delve into the crucial task of enhancing media literacy and public awareness to help effectively discern and counter fake news and misinformation. Our first presenter today is Dr. Zubaida Dawood, CSIR Research Group Leader in Information and Cybersecurity, who will present her research on combating fake news and misinformation during elections. Directly after Dr. Dawood, Professor Lukosi Marivate from the Data Science for Social Impact Research Group at UP will take us through his presentation on combating online misinformation using data science for social impact. After all of these presentations, we will have a Q&A session. Please join me in welcoming our first speaker. Thank you, Dr. Dawood.
Thank you so much, Lindy. I hope everybody can hear me.
Yes, can.
Perfect. I'm just going to share my screen. I think somebody probably has their mic on.
Yeah, I'm going to mute people.
Okay, thanks. Okay, hi everybody. I'm Dr. Zubaida Dawood. I am a research group leader at the Information and Cybersecurity Center in the CSIR, where I do research about cybersecurity trends and so forth. I do have a PhD from the University of Cape Town. So let me just get straight into it then. So for today's presentation, I'm going to take you through to the origin and evolution of fake news, followed by deepfakes in social media. Thereafter, I'll discuss disinformation during the elections and then tackling fake news. So this is just a little excerpt of, something that was out there in 1835 to show that fake news isn't a new thing. So in 1835, sensationalism always sold well. So by the 19th century, modern newspapers were out and there were fake stories here. So here we have the Great Moon Hoax by The Sun. So this is, dates all the way back to the 1835. But, it's a lot different today. So, let's just get into what is fake news. Fake news is false information. So this is, carefully and purposely crafted for a reason. It's sensational. It makes you want to share it and to look at it more. It, emotionally charges you. And then at the end of the day, it could be misleading or totally fabricated or, just a mix of both. So
sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you. We can't see your presentation.
Oh, I see.
And Natasha, if you can just please switch off your camera. Thank you.
All right. Sorry about that.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
So luckily I didn't go through that much yet. So let me get back to it. So we spoke a bit about misinformation and disinformation. So what really is the difference? So misinformation is, information that you just spread. You don't have a malicious intent. You just spread it. And then disinformation is when you do this with a cause. So you really want to cause some harm. So you deliberately do this for some propaganda or some agenda. And then fake news is false stories that just look like news, whether it's misinformation or disinformation. And it's usually created to influence political view or as a joke. So this is just some memes that I brought in just to highlight what we think as humans. So when we read something, we say, if this is against me, then it's fake news. I don't think it's true. Or we also go the route of, oh, I read this today on the internet, then it has to be true. And I'm sure we see this in the communities. So here is a good example of the differences. So for misinformation, Babamkulu, in the family WhatsApp group, he shares a receive free Krispy Kreme for a year. He's doing this solely for sharing the love of donuts with his family. Disinformation, on the other hand, is the criminal that creates this fake website that wants to steal your money, and then fake news is the online article that appears to be legit and it contains this information. So I did say modern fake news began in the 1800s, but why is it different today? So in today's world of data, we've got something called the 5 V's of big data: volume. So we're looking at a huge amount of data. Nowadays, we have, I think, zettabytes of data. The variety of data. So we've got structured data, unstructured data, pictures, images. It's a lot of different things. Velocity. We can create data very quickly. We can distribute it very quickly via the internet. Then we have value. How do we know, how do we extract something meaningful from it? And then veracity. How do we know this can be trusted or not? Which brings us to today's presentation. So since 2020, artificial intelligence research just rocketed. I mean, we've always been speaking about AI, but researchers and scientists were doing the underlying research. And then in 2020, ChatGPT emerged, and then everybody else released their tools as well. So this has, both good and bad effects. So the good is that, you can also get AI-based tools for checking fake news. And then the bad is that these tools can also create fake news. But maybe on the good news, we can use AI to fact check, to identify manipulated media, and to analyze the language. So it's a double-edged sword. So here is just looking at the articles out there on AI and fake news. Nearly 50 news websites are AI generated. AI voice clone mimics politicians, and there's a bunch of things out there. So while AI is there to detect fake news, it also makes it so much harder to detect, because look at ChatGPT, Gemini, and others. We can create prompts to generate articles for us. So in previous, where we would say the fake news looks like it has spelling errors and grammar, now, look at this prompt. You write a paragraph from the point of an anti-vaccine advocate, and everything is neatly written out for you. There are features in our tools to help us stop generating fake news, but we are humans. We can trick these tools to still write these articles for us. Then why do we spread it? It goes all the way back to psychology. So looking at confirmation bias, we tend to believe articles that, is part of what we believe in, our belief system, and so forth. Then there is today the viral ability of social media. Everybody just spreads everything quickly. They want to be the first to send it to the family. There's the illusory truth effect. So when we are told the same thing again and again and again, regardless of whether it's true or not, we begin to ingrain this into our minds, we latch it on, and we believe it. So social media definitely plays a role here, and AI makes it so much easier to create this fake news. Looking at 2023 trends, in 2023 there were 4.8 billion social media identities. In 2024, by now it's about 5 billion. On average, a person spends 2 hours every day using social media, whether it's TikTok, Facebook, LinkedIn, whatever. So we spend a lot of time out there, which goes to show we're exposed to a lot. And these are the tools used for creating fake news. On the left, we have our social media platforms, which are more responsible for distributing things. And on the right, we have our AI-based tools such as ChatGPT, Quillbots, and so forth, which a user can easily use to generate news. Also important to note, there are different types of fake news. In the South African context, we do see a lot of satire and parody when the public generally make fun of ministers, but there's also false connection, misleading content, imposter content, and even fabricated content. And what are the implications of this? So it all starts with distrust in our country, in our government. This leads to people, having different political ideologies, and polarization occurs. Then it leads to outbursts and violence and, attacks. Eventually, everybody is in panic, which is, a problem for the democracy of the country. Nowadays, we have something called deepfakes, which is used maliciously. So, deepfakes are realistic videos that look like a person saying or doing something, but it's not actually them. You take their pictures and their voice and you match them into other videos for cyber criminals to use to spread lies. This is now on the rise. So, it simulates your brain through an algorithm. And then fabricating deepfakes is a time consuming thing, but we do think it's going to get easier to make now with more tools. So there have been an increased use in this, and we need to continue to be active in creating the relevant policies to make sure that this is regulated. Technology definitely plays, a part here in leading to the propaganda and disinformation. So the global impact here is that disinformation through social media is now a global tactic used to sway elections. And there are a lot of incidents that come to light for this, which I will go through. Locally, the DA is seeking advice after one of its MPs, Glenys Breitenbach, also fell prey to a deep fake voice recording. So there is a TikTok video out there by the user Bobby Greenhash, which has a voice recording of the MP, where it makes all sorts of claims. So although now we know that this is a deep fake, there is still the likelihood of lasting reputational damage for the party in progress. So we hear this voice recording and we associate it with a political party, which is bad for the reputation. Internationally, in 2023, there was a voice note of the US President Joe Biden doing the rounds, urging voters, to cast their votes for a certain party. And then later, all the way in 2016, Russia was also accused of doing some disinformation to sway the US elections. Looking at country policies, South Africa is doing well in some regards. So we've got policy work around hate speech and task forces, but we are lacking policy work around, elections and misinformation, which is problematic. But the good news is that we do have sanctions in place, so there will be penalties out there for people who, do malicious things. To empower our voters, what we need to do, is to teach people how to be vigilant and discern fact from fake. We need to be aware of common tactics for doctored audio messages and so forth. Social media plays a role in this. So to be resilient, we need to, address this then through social media. We need to strengthen our cybersecurity measures. And this is only possible through a collaboration between our government, through tech companies and research institutes, universities as well, to create a resilient workforce against disinformation. In order to spot fake news, there are a couple of tips. We must also always look at the source of where the news is coming from, read beyond the headlines, have a look more about the author, cross-check other supporting sources, look at the date and try to think, is this satire or not? There are also technological tools such as Snopes, Africa Check, Media Bias Fact Check. You can have a look at this. And there's just a couple of tips here. Check if the source and the URL looks legit. Do a quick search on the author to see if they're a real journalist. Verify the information, cross-check with other sites. Look at the date, because sometimes we go Old articles come to light which isn't relevant. Look at the grammar. And then, even though ChatGPT and the tools can make everything, grammar free, try and look if it sounds like this is, a ChatGPT essay. All in all, you really need to develop a critical mindset and use online tools, that are out there. And if you're not sure what to do, always ask a family member or a friend that is tech savvy. So here is how you can use Snopes. You just throw in some information. This is a hoax about that Facebook will start charging this summer. It's an old hoax. Snopes tell you about its origin and so forth. It's a really great tool. And then just to highlight that, media houses also play a role in this, which is why we should always consume news from a variety of different sources. So here is a bell dome showing, in the US sense, liberal versus conservative media houses. And at the bottom, how they push fabricated news, and then higher up, the news becomes clearer and more factual. So it's really important to be aware of this media bias and to consume news from various media houses. In terms of what we're doing, we have a lot of exciting projects at the CSIR, particularly in the Information and Cybersecurity Center, and we're also collaborating with the University of Pretoria. So we're looking at AI and machine learning. We want to, analyze patterns to identify fake news, also look at sentiment analysis to see how people are tweeting and so forth. And we are continuously learning to adapt and evolve the tactics here. We also recognize the collaborative role that needs to occur with global entities and local entities. And this is all in all to help empower our voters and educate them on identifying and reporting fake news and to promote media literacy. Other exciting work we're doing is that we're developing now a human-centric framework for detecting fake news. We do recognize that technological tools right now may not accurately portray the South African context, where we have various cultural backgrounds, different languages, our own memes and trends. So we want to look at a human-centric framework also to get outreach out there to some people who don't have technology. So this fosters, conversation between communities to verify information. We also have the Mzansi Advanced Cybersecurity Learning Factory. So the South African elections do rely on digital infrastructure. So we note that the MaxLF, or the Mzansi Learning Factory, can empower our IEC workers and officials by equipping them with good training on how they can prevent phishing attacks, malware infections, and not manipulate the election data. So building a skilled workforce here is key, and the MaxLF can assist with this by safeguarding our elections. Some of our past work, getting out there in the public, we developed posters and statistical analysis. These are some of the posters that we can definitely share later on. And I think that's it from me. Thank you. Let me hand over to our chair, Lindy, and here is my email address on the screen for further queries. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Dawood. Up next, we welcome Professor Vukosi Marivate from the Data Science for Social Impact Research Group at UP, and his presentation on combating online misinformation using data science for social impact. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for the invitation again, and been looking forward to giving this presentation. I'm Vukosi, as it's been said. I'm at the University of Pretoria, and I'll be talking about battling election misinformation and disinformation in South Africa. I'm at the Data Science for Social Impact Research Group as the principal investigator. I also am a co-founder of Lelapa AI, an AI company that's working on research in specific areas, and also co-founder of the Deep Learning Indaba and Masakane Natural Language Processing Research. initiative that are both grassroots AI organizations on the continent that are working to strengthen AI and natural language processing for African languages. At the university, in the group, we have a number of students, staff, where 70% of them are working on AI in African languages, and also AI and things like misinformation and disinformation. And on the other parts are working on social impact, like social impact work in places like health and education. Really, to highlight the big thing I wanted to say today, right at the beginning, is that when it comes to misinformation and disinformation, and my colleague just spoke in terms of what it is, there's been a lot of major changes in the way that we get access to social media data. So if you need to do analysis or monitoring, a big important thing is that you need to have access to the information that's actually being put out there so you can analyze it. But with the major spread of AI systems, and especially these chat systems, there's been a big changes in views in availability of data openly for research purposes. So this has meant that now in the past work that we were able to do, and I'll show a little bit of it, is harder to do because you actually can't get access to the data. So what does this mean? A lot of misinformation happens on social media platforms and through user-generated data. So you would need to then get access to that user-generated data to do analysis of what those posts are, and then be able to feed back into other systems. So there needs to be policies and regulation that need to be available to allow researchers actually to have access to these social media data. There's also challenges with automated content moderation, and also challenges with local languages and code switching, meaning that even if you have systems that are there to do content moderation automatically, they might be mostly working on English content, and it's hard for them to actually work on, especially in South Africa where we have 12 languages, our languages being able to process and identifying if something might actually be harmful, misinformation, disinformation. It also then puts up this question of if there's violations to election rules, rules from the IEC, it becomes harder and harder to really monitor if you don't actually have capability to directly access or sample from these platforms. So on our side at the Data Science for Social Impact Research Group, we have a lot of ongoing projects. So we're still working on COVID-19 misinformation through lots of different data, some from the social media platforms, some from our partners like Media Monitoring Africa and their Real 411 platform. And we are especially looking at putting together, analyzing images and the text that is connected to content that's available. We're doing detection on images and video. In text, we're looking at elections, we're looking at health misinformation, and we're looking at incorporating South African languages and identifying content that might be suspicious. And when you're doing this, then it requires new tools to be able to process those languages. We also have been very active in hosting workshops, not just for ourselves in academia, but then other organizations outside representing governments, NGO, civic society, and other organizations that really have a very big interest in this. So in this, we are looking at now having an online forum for people to connect on battling disinformation. And we've had a good representation of different organizations, and we're always willing to work with people to see how we can bring some of our AI and modeling tools into the spaces that they require, and then also we can learn from them in different ways. So with the current 2024 elections, we do have a forum, an online forum that we've put together that helps people work on asking questions, contextualizing, doing fact-checking if there's information that comes through, and then working to inform the public, and then seeing if there has to be ways to escalate through tools like Real 411, for example, from the MMA. The major current challenge, just to reiterate before I show an example of some of the work that we've done, is access to data, access to data, access to data. This was warned, I think, going back to 2022. For example, here, saying that we have all this data that is held inside social media platforms. And now with the changes, especially for something like Twitter and X going back to October 2022, reducing that access has a big impact on researchers, right? And this will make social media research very hard. And now if we think about research for misinformation, it makes it even almost kind of impossible unless you're paying for access for those for that data, and it really becomes unwieldy in terms of how much the cost actually is. And for myself as a researcher who also cares about doing research on African languages, one of the biggest sources for African languages was Twitter, right? We used to use it to collect data, do modeling, and then build up tools that are then released to the public. And this has become also a big discussion point in some policy circles, especially in the EU or the European Union, to the point that now the Digital Markets Act and the Digital Services Act, for it to really be active, it requires this access for researchers. And what you're seeing is that now they are pushing through in their Digital Service Act that researchers can be vetted, and if they are, they should be able to do research on search engines and large online platforms. But currently, at the moment, this is something that we might not have, being outside the EU, being in South Africa, being on the African continent. And as again, what I'm trying to get people to understand is if you don't have this, it's very hard for you to then do any analysis and modeling on the other side. So I'll show you an example that we did in 2020 for the 2021 elections between ourselves, the CSIR Media Monitoring Africa. And what we wanted to really highlight here is that despite having some policies and computational tools by social media orgs, there's still accounts that perpetuate misinformation, and they fall under the radar. The work had these three teams working together and interacting in different ways to build up modeling and analysis. And we wanted to understand heuristics that might help us in the future go into early warning systems of misinformation. And this requires then this combination that you have to have people and data science. You can't just work on saying, hey, you're going to use AI. It needs actually people. And even the work that we'll be doing this year is really heavily reliant on having people who can identify misinformation. Right. And the impact of people spreading misinformation, even if it's unintended, or disinformation campaigns, is that it does affect the thoughts and feelings and can affect elections. And this has been shown in the past as well, that people targeting these. Right. So in some ways, we need to still continue understanding social media information dissemination as a study. There's more study of misinformation and disinformation that's required on the continent. And we need to come up with these new methods to do this and also understand the gaps in our current policy making. So you might have information that is shared with people online. And you have, as I said, services like Real 411 that comes from the Media Monitoring Africa. And they have fact checkers who look at the content and then will say, assess that content. But typically this takes a little bit longer, and you might want to do this faster or in real time, right? So we need to really study the spread of misinformation in different ways. So what we did in 2021 is that 2 months in the lead up to the election, we worked to collect data. One is we chose Twitter as the platform. At that time, we had an open API. We had a research account as well that that we had applied for. And then we could then get data from them. And then also having some Real 411 data that they were collecting also as well. We collected Twitter handles of the major parties, the leaders, as well as hashtags, and a couple of parties that were suggested by Media Monitoring Africa. Throughout that time, we collected about 727,000 Twitter posts during that period. And as you can see here, the general pattern is that as you get closer and closer to the election date of the municipal elections, you can see that the activity started going higher and higher. Just to note that this is a sample. This is not all posts that were put up. It's just that Twitter gives you a sample that you can then use to do analysis. We also then do see that these are just the top 100 users. And then you can see that user number 0 is just for privacy here. We don't reveal who that is as they're not public persons. There's a few users who create a lot of content during that period, and you need to identify, is it spam? Is it a campaign for something? Or is it just the way that they send out posts? And you can also look things like the top words and phrases, things like South Africans, local government, and other phrases that are in there. We also visualize how each party actually creates posts, and you can see that for most of them, they might actually have content that is dissimilar to each other, and then at some things there might be general information that actually clustered together. So each point there is just a different post on social media, and then if they're closer to each other, it might be the same or very similar kind of content that is inside there. So in terms of the major results in my last time, I wanted to highlight just if we looked at what are the main words or hashtags that are being shared on a weekly basis. Week 9 at the end here is the week before the election, and you can go backwards, and you can see in most of this LGE 2021 local government elections are the main things. So it's a mix of topics. We note over time. We can identify different events like manifesto launches, candidate ratios, party messaging, and then displeasure with some parties, right? So that's one thing. What we did now is that we used a service called Bottometer, where we went and took the top users and mentioners, the people who were really sending a lot of content, and you give that username to the service, and the service looks at that account and then tries to give you a score between 0 and 5, whether this might be bot activity. So these automated tools that might be spreading spam or misinformation or other things. So if you're close to 5, there's a higher likelihood that your misinformation. If you're close to 0, you're less to be just a normal account. Then you can see most users were in the normal area, but there's a few who are really higher. And just to give context is that it doesn't mean at all times if you have a high score, it means there's misinformation. So here at the time is EFF South Africa, they tend to have a higher score, but it's also because they are sharing a lot of information in a very short space of time, which is as they're campaigning, same thing, like you'll find here's the DA, here's the ANC, all of them will have different ways that they share things, and sometimes this might set off things. So you have to have the context. And remember, as I said, you need humans on the other side to check some of these things. So as we continue with this, what we can do now is then say, okay, instead of checking everything, let's now check the users that have very high scores, and then we look at, and then we don't know them, or we don't think that they are like just political parties. And one of the things you identify is some spam, things like invest in Limpopo, and we see this hashtag put South Africa first as another thing. The other thing we did is, because we had the benefit of hindsight 6 months after the election, we then also went and looked at the accounts, in the top accounts that had high Bottometer scores that ended up being suspended by Twitter at the time. And when we look at their top topics that are being shared, we see that there's a lot of content that actually ends up being connected to either anti-vaccine campaigns or vaccine misinformation or COVID misinformation during that period. And it actually accelerates as we get closer and closer to the election. So this becomes very interesting that actually the accounts that tended to be suspended by the social media platform were mostly about COVID. Right? They weren't about, it's not that through there we identified that actually the suspended accounts had to do with some election misinformation and disinformation. This, for us, highlights that there's more work that needs to be done in this area, as I said, for monitoring, because it will give us an indication of really what's going on. It's not that the social media platforms are looking out for misinformation about elections. It's just that they have their own system. Just as an example, is that the Party of Action, which was one of the parties contesting during that time, had their account actually suspended during the period. You can see here their leader highlighted this thing. And to also highlight shares, so they said, like, we're not just picking them out. They were suspended. They were in our data set. And they also came out in this social listening report that was shared by the Department of Health, that they were sharing a lot of information that was against COVID vaccines at the time. And this, again, fits with the part that the social media platforms were not necessarily looking for disinformation or misinformation about elections, but they had a system at that time that actually looked at COVID misinformation. And if this is possible, we do think that there should be a way to also work with other organizations to actually build up systems that can identify election misinformation and disinformation. So as I said, there's been major changes in the social media data, and we need to find ways to access it. We need to update policies. We need to deal with better automated content moderation for African languages and African contexts. And we won't be able to really enforce things or violations of electoral rules if we don't have ways to directly access sample data from those platforms. So thanks at the moment for this, and I am reachable at my email there, and then you can also go learn about our research group. Thank you.
Thank you so much to our presenters today. I'm going to open the floor for questions from the media on Teams. I will also check the chat in our YouTube live stream. So please go ahead. If you have a question, please raise your hand. Kindly indicate your name and the media house that you are representing. Thank you. Also, who the question is directed at, please. Natasha, please go ahead.
Hi, everybody. Hi. I don't know what's going on there. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. I just muted as well, but it doesn't seem to be mine. So, but please go ahead. Let's see.
Okay, so my question is for Dr. Zubaydah. She mentioned a number of sanctions that are put in place to combat fake news. Can you just please elaborate on that and just tell us? And then furthermore, can the two presenters just also share their presentations with us, just maybe by form of an email or something?
Yes, kindly drop your email in the chat if you would like for us to share the presentations with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the question. Oh, what's going on? Let me just turn that off. Okay. So there are, a bunch of regulations in place that I think actually COVID-19 was probably the force here that pushed these sanctions. So during COVID-19, some regulations came into light about controlling misinformation, about vaccines and COVID and all of that. So based on this, these are the things that are out there. But it's also important to note that this is being updated regularly. At the CSIR, we are in contact with the government and the government departments on the current laws and regulations that are in place. So I can definitely share, a more comprehensive updated list after the presentation alongside the slides. Thanks.
Apologies, I was muted. Thank you. Do we have any other questions? Does not look like it. I'm just quickly checking the YouTube chat. All right, we have a question from James Francis. He is asking, are things not moving too fast to rely on citizen vigilance to spot fake information?
Yes, things are moving very fast. Dr. Bukosi, did you want to elaborate on that, or should I tackle this one? Sorry, Prof. Okay, I see he's muted. Yes, things are moving very rapidly. So things that were relevant probably a couple months ago are not relevant right now. Probably why, constant cybersecurity awareness training is really vital, which brings in our cybersecurity learning factory. So this is, constantly updated. It can be integrated into the community, into universities, SMEs, as well as organizations. So I think just being up to date with all of this is really relevant, and we recognize what a challenge this is. This is why, we're doing this cybersecurity learning factory project, and probably Prof Bokosi and them are doing more on the tool-based solutions.
Thank you. Prof. Maravate, would you like to elaborate on that, or do you think we covered everything?
Yeah, thanks. It's what I highlighted is that you need a mix of things when you're working in these spaces. You can't just work on saying there's an automated system or a tool-based system. You need both the people. It's very contextual. I think Zubeida talked about things like satire. So people need to look at the content and then be able to look at it and say like, oh, actually, this is not okay. And it's not just necessarily for a machine-driven approach. And that's why it tends to be very intensive for organizations to be able to do this very well. For the US elections, for example, there's a lot of resources that are used by the platforms to make sure that they can monitor during that period, especially given that they're most of them based in the United States. But for us, they're not based here. So now asking and saying, can you please put resources towards this is a bit harder. And that's why it pushes for this access, that researchers have to have access to these systems in terms of the data to be able to sample, to be able to check, and then to be able to assist in the monitoring. And this also connects to the public awareness, right? Because if something is identified quickly, then there can be actually the correct information highlighted to people. And with the age of deepfakes, we know they're getting better and better and better. This will become more and more of a problem. We're seeing in South Africa how this is affecting, especially people committing fraud using deepfakes in different ways. Yeah, I'll stop there.
Thank you. There's a carry on from that question, also from James. He says, thank you. What would you advise state leaders to do to combat fake info, and is our alignment with Russia a concern?
I guess I can start on that. So I think there are already good collaborations in place. So I would just continue onto this, collaborating with us, research institutes, that they are occurring right now, and then recognizing that the community also has a role to play. So as leaders, we need to be resilient. We need to take a proactive stance. And to ensure that, even people in disadvantaged communities, these are the people who don't have access to a variety of different news. They solely focus on what they get. So just to tackle those kind of areas, because even if you're in a disadvantaged community, you might still have a cell phone, but you're not so clued up on the regulations and the education around it. So it's really important for us to partner with, even the private sector to get funding, for us to all come together and see how we can really close the cybersecurity skills shortage gap, as well as, digital literacy. And then on the Russian stance, I have no clue about that, because, that is a political thing. We are just researchers. We are just looking at the facts. Prof. Marivate, anything to add?
Sorry. Yeah. I think to echo Zubeida's words, we do need more support in different spheres, just to highlight, the challenge to do things like more public education takes time, and it is becoming more and more part of our data security, information security, that disinformation has to be taken care of. And I do think it's most likely for the parts of either nation state driven or misinformation or disinformation, it would likely require other types of researchers who work on looking at these kind of geopolitical, like manifestations of some of these. That's not necessarily what we're looking at. I can highlight maybe some research that comes from the Africa Center for Strategic Studies, I'll just put it in the chat and that can be shared, but it's not our work. I'm just saying that there are other people who look at this.
Thank you. We also have a question
in the chat, yeah.
In the chat, yes. Good morning. Thanks for the presentations. Dr. Dawood mentioned that the CSIR is developing a human-centric framework for detecting fake news. What is the progress with that, and who would be allowed to use it?
Great question. Thank you for the interest there. That is almost complete, and it will be out there for public use, so definitely everybody can use it, but it's very sort of research right now, so it's also important for us, the researchers, to package it in a way that, you know, your average South African can consume this. So once we get the work published, you know, in our reputable articles or peer-reviewed kind of space, we are working on, you know, creating more human, more for the public consumption kind of a work. So definitely, probably in a month or two, it will be out there for the public. Thanks.
Great. Thank you. Let's see. Okay, I don't see any other chats or questions in the YouTube stream. And then, do you have any other questions? Smiki, I see you're typing. If you would like to ask your question, please go ahead. If you would like to unmute, or you can continue, and then I'll read it. Okay, he says, yes, thanks. Are we able to get the financial implications of misinformation and disinformation?
Yes and no. So there is financial implications of cybersecurity crimes. There probably is a statistic about misinformation. I just don't know that at the top of my head. But in terms of cybersecurity crime in South Africa, I think it costs about 2.2 billion rand annually. So definitely misinformation and disinformation will contribute to that in some sense. And then also on the statistics, I think South Africa is the 6th most highest country in the world in terms of cybercrime. And I think we also have a hand up. Thanks.
Yes, we do. Sorry, I'm just going through. Is it William? Please go ahead with your question.
Thank you so much. It's William from News 24. I'm wondering, with large language models, so I saw that example with the anti-vax, you know, how easy it is to trick the models. Has there been any improvement? I mean, we've had these tools for roughly over, ChatGPT was roughly over a year now. Has there been any improvement that you've seen where you know, it's at least harder to trick the tools? And then I suppose with Google Gemini and the image generation, is there also a concern that it might be harder with the image generation tools to separate fact from fiction with pictures?
Okay, I'll try at this. Hopefully my connection is good. Yeah, so when we build more kind of large language models, there's things that they're getting better at in better processing the text itself. But then again, given that most of these models are working in English, some of the ways that it's been shown to really still deal with, having problems with content moderation, which, let's say that's what the disinformation kind of comes out as, you want to do content moderation. In other languages, these models don't work as well. At University of Pretoria, we're working on building better models in our languages, but this is still not something necessarily that you find in these major platforms as being the things that are necessarily used all the time. They might have multilingual models, but these models don't do well in the smaller languages. They might still do well in the very big, English, some European languages, but really poorly in African languages. So the thing is now, if you have somebody who's running a disinformation campaign, they can just work on code switching or code mixing, where you mix languages and to then avoid detection in one way. The other thing then, when it comes to both images and video, it is something that now there's the tools to generate video are getting better. The tools to try and process video are getting better. But then what I was trying to highlight is that it's not necessarily the automated systems at the moment that we need, but we need this kind of combined effort of different people to work together to do this, because automating it is harder, because in this hour, somebody might target specific type of content, but the next hour it changes. And it changes much faster necessarily than the systems themselves can. Even, I think, even if you had that, you had complete cooperation or resources from these big platforms to allow to work on these things, it's still things slip out. And as such, what you need is to have almost like, an information center that is staffed with people before elections now, just to check for these types of things and be able to coordinate with these platforms. And the resourcing is not small to be able to do that well. The AI systems or the more automated systems are just as a helping tool for those types of things. And that's why you need to add that plus the public education, right? You need to be battling this on different fronts. But there's a lot of work that's still going into that. We're doing a lot in trying to look at how misinformation might be spread in Tshivenda, in Setswana, in isiZulu, and how that might be different to the one that is actually created in English in South Africa. That's just one of the studies that our PhD student and staff member, Siani Rananga, will be looking at.
Thanks. I think that also covers the question in the chat, which is a follow-up on the human-centric system. Does it incorporate NLP, meaning any local language is incorporated, or does it work in English? So I think we covered that as well, unless if you guys want to expand a bit, if I'm misunderstanding.
Yes, I'll just probably add a point or two. So at the moment, the framework that we developed right now is English-based, but we have NLP colleagues, in the UP, as well as some others in UCT. The colleagues in UCT are experts in Nguni languages, so definitely we're collaborating on them with that to, identify those patterns in some of those languages. And then I just also wanted to elaborate a little bit on the question about the AI tools and how they have progressed in terms of we can trick them. Yes, the security has progressed since the onset. I personally have seen, that certain AI tools are a little bit more secure than others. But at the end of the day, I did find workarounds around some questions that we shouldn't be asking them. So we can certainly frame things in a certain way to get what we want. And then overall, certain tools definitely are more secure than others. Thanks.
Thank you so much. So we have more. William, please go ahead.
So it's one additional question. Thank you for the answers, by the way, and for hosting the session. I'm interested in terms of assessing the threat. So obviously people use large language models as almost like a personal assistant, where you can ask questions to it and get responses and refine those responses. But you could also have bias in those responses is the potential concern. But then the other way of looking at it is that a bad actor can generate as much content as they like and then post that on what looks like a human's account. Is that the bigger threat? Is passing off AI generated content as being human? So how do you weigh those threats? The threats of somebody using it like a personal assistant and getting perhaps distorted or biased information from there, versus a bad actor lifting the text and passing it off as being human?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for that. Yeah, I think this is what in some ways informed the work back in 2021 on trying to look at if you could identify if there were bots or content that looks like bots. And the thing is, there's a lot of different attack vectors here. Sorry to use that word. I also used to in information security a long time ago. And one is that, yes, you could create accounts and then these accounts create content and the content is driven by a large language model in the background. That is entirely possible. You also see this likely every day anyway. We've had, there's been lots of challenges with X or Twitter in the last year because of some reductions in their content moderation teams physically. And then also, I think it seems also stopping some tools. So one, for example, the COVID misinformation system was switched off. We know this. I think we can find the references to that. So that now there's more spread of some types of misinformation. And also this noise of spam, people trying to hijack keywords and hashtags and as such. That's one way, and that can be something that's, if you see a bot network showing up talking about the same thing for a couple of minutes or hours, there's likely ways to remove that. The challenge also becomes what other people are doing is that they then also target micro influencers or even bigger influencers where they pay them money. So they identify people who have accounts that have good enough following, and then you pay them specific amounts and then say, please then send out posts about this. This is not just used by obviously bad actors for misinformation or disinformation spreading, but this is also used as part of ways people advertise for services online. So that's the challenge, right? Of, again, the nuance of figuring out which one is what is also a bigger item. I think another thing in the question that maybe we have to think about is maybe how in large language models that people are using, misinformation can seep through. And it just comes down to the way that we build these types of systems. If you have content that might be widely available and it's actually wrong, so we're not thinking about disinformation where somebody's trying to push out a campaign that's as a bad actor, but then you have some information that is wrong, but it shows up being repeated a lot on the internet. Remember, these large language models, most of them are trained by huge data sets of internet data. What happens is that now that large language model is likely to perpetuate that bias or that wrong information. And that's why we then again in the side of education, we need to educate the public on a large language model does not replace information seeking, right? This thing of going to different sources, checking, reading, and then coming up with a conclusion. You need to actually read the thing and then contextualize it and then try to figure out, is it actually correct or not? You cannot just take them as saying whatever they've generated is true. And this is shown because there's challenges with hallucination, there's challenges with bias that is inside these models, non-representativeness, they don't represent our languages as well. So you can, if you start asking or getting answers in our local languages, they have a lot of problems.
Thank you. We have another question on YouTube from Anina. In relation to above, will researchers like yourselves assist public and the media in real time to flag and track and analyze specific disinformation, fake news, misinformation campaigns during and before elections?
Yes, we do often do this, in our personal capacity as well as in our professional capacity. So we'll definitely, do as much as we can to assist people in real time. Thanks.
Thank you. I don't see any other questions. Let's maybe do a last round in the Teams meeting if anyone else has any additional questions. Okay, it doesn't look like it. Thank you all for joining us today. Please feel free to contact myself, Lindy Meyer, or Petulu Patsibi if you are interested in conducting any media interviews with any of the presenters and our experts today. And thank you for joining us. We appreciate it. Have a great day.